So it's been, next month will be 14 years since I arrived in the mission field. So it's been a while, but I did get to go back and revisit the mission just a few months ago. And so going back into the airport, I was reminded of the airport experience. And so at the MTC, my instructors they had all gone French speaking on their missions in Europe. So they've been in Belgium and France. And the French that we learned from them and the accent that they used was much different than the Quebecois accent. So I remember getting to the airport and having to go through customs and get our visas approved and everything, and just not understanding anything that was going on around us. They were speaking French, well, Quebecois, and we were just all terrified. We're like, we thought we spent 8 or 9 weeks at the MTC. We thought we had it down, at least the basics to have a conversation. We couldn't understand a thing. So that's my first memory of being in Canada, was understanding nothing. And then of course they speak English as well. So as soon as they found out we didn't understand what they were saying, they'd speak English to us, and we were at ease. So that was just exciting and a very, very new experience. So that's the airport experience. The next experience, so from the airport, we went out to the main terminal, the bus station there in Montreal, and we met our trainers. Let me back up. From the airport, we went to the mission home. We met the mission president that night. We stayed at his house. And then the next morning, we met our trainers at the bus station. And I found out I was going to Hull, which is about, I want to say it was 2 or 3 hours away from Montreal, out near Ontario, Canada. And so I got on a train, and then with a couple other missionaries, and we went out and met our new areas, and it was just exciting. You get into the country and you get to work right away. It was really cool. Actually, I'll go back to my mission call, because that's where I first learned that Montreal is in fact in Canada, not the United States. So at the time, they had a Major League Baseball team, the Montreal Expos, and apparently I didn't pay attention in geography, but I assumed because they had a baseball team, they were in the U.S. So when I got my mission call and I'm reading that I'm going to Montreal, Canada, I'm like, oh, there's a Montreal in Canada too. And then I found out it's French speaking. I had no idea they spoke French anywhere in North America. So that was pretty exciting. So Montreal is the biggest city in the province of Quebec in Canada. Quebec City is actually the capital of Quebec, the province, but Montreal is also in Quebec. So a lot of people hear Quebec or Montreal and they think they're very separate places, but Montreal is part of the French province, Quebec. However, in Montreal, which is actually an island in the middle of a big river, it's about maybe 50-50 English and French speakers. Most everybody speaks both. They kind of have to do business, or if you want to work in the donut shop or whatever, you got to be able to accommodate French and French and English speakers. So I thought that was really interesting when I first got there, and seeing, wow, everybody just speaks both, and sometimes in the same sentence. And throughout the rest of the mission, there are smaller towns. Some are very, very French, and very few people will speak English to you, and others are very, very English towns. And it all has to do with the history of what businesses were there and what families settled the areas. And so I'd say most of Quebec, outside of Montreal and some suburbs of Montreal, are very French speaking. As you get out towards Ontario, Canada, and Ottawa, the capital of Canada, which was also in our mission, it's very English out there. So it's a little bit about kind of the language there. There's also people from all over the world, which was exciting. So many different nationalities and languages, and good food to go with that. So that's a little bit about the language and culture there. As far as how that impacts the church and the wards there, when I was serving in downtown Montreal, I was there for about 6 months. The building we met in had 3 wards. One was English, one was French, and one was Spanish. And it was really interesting because a lot of people from all those wards spoke all 3 languages. Either they had served missions and learned Spanish or French, or they were native Spanish speakers and they had come and learned French and English to be able to go to school and work. And so that was exciting to see those wards, even though they were in different wards. But they interact. They had the institute classes together. The young adults did. They would have activities together and singles family home evenings together. So it's really fun to see how the diverse cultures interact and in the church are united by the gospel. It also creates some challenges. In that English ward I served in, there were a lot of the investigators were immigrants who were there studying or had come to work or be with family and hadn't learned English that well yet, or didn't know French or Spanish. And so sometimes it was hard to create the unity within the ward as well, because there was so much diversity. We'd have a Mandarin Sunday school class, and we'd have some others, another group from Sri Lanka that would meet together and speak Tamil. So, I mean, it was interesting, but it created some challenges for the ward. One of the other challenges there is a lot of the young people in the smaller towns of Quebec, they go to the big city for school and then end up getting jobs there. And so some of the towns have a shrinking population, and it's hard on the church as well, because there aren't a lot of young families. They've moved out, gotten married, met somebody somewhere else. And so you'll have, a couple people with young families, but a lot of, I don't want to say older, but, grandparents that are in the ward, but not a lot of youth to support the continued growth in some of the branches and wards in the mission. So the province of Quebec historically was very French Catholic. There are a lot of just cathedrals and Catholic churches, some with beautiful architecture, and unfortunately a lot of them haven't been well maintained. And there's a very Catholic culture there, especially among generations of people at the time that were, over 50 years old. Most of them still practiced Catholicism, and there was also, unfortunately, there had been incidences in some of the towns where, and I don't know if it had to do with English and French conflicts that are part of the history, or other religious conflicts, but where people have lost a lot of faith and chosen to either be agnostic or just stop religious practice and maybe hold some of their own beliefs, but not worship together or serve in a religious community. And I say that was people probably like between age 30 and 50, and they all had different reasons. And some felt, maybe they something had happened in their family that took them away from the church. And it's not dissimilar from what we see in other parts of the world. But for some reason, there was a big impact, and it hurt the Catholic Church. A lot of their churches were not being well maintained. They were selling them, and as a missionary, it made it somewhat difficult too, because for some of these people, all they knew was the conflict they had with religious leaders of another faith, or from their past, or things they had heard from their parents or grandparents that made them uncomfortable about religion. And so it was, I guess, it was an opportunity as well as a missionary to be like, this is what we believe. Like, what do you think about it? And just try and start a conversation and offer a new perspective on religion. And I think that's something that's helpful for anybody who's been offended, no matter what the faith is. Like, to have somebody give them fresh perspective and a new hope in believing in Christianity again. So one exciting thing about the church, the LDS church history there, is President Monson, who's our prophet now, was the mission president there for a few years. And you read about his experiences in his biography, or he's shared some of them in conference stories. But a lot of the original membership in Quebec, a lot of them have personal experiences with him, with President Monson as a mission president. And a lot of the strength in the church are those people and their children and grandchildren now. One of the branches I served in, there was the Terrian family, and they were, if I remember right, they were converted. A group of several brothers and sisters, they all were converted and baptized during President Monson's presidency as the mission president. And so they now have several sets of children and grandchildren that have spread throughout several towns and created several branches, and are really a strength to the new members there, because they've been, they have a multi-generational LDS family, which is what's not very common at all in the mission. So the church is growing a ton. So I was just there in this past November, a few months ago, and there's been 1 or 2 stakes added to the mission. So I think they have 3 or 4 stakes now. It used to be just 1 stake and a district. And they also have a temple in Montreal, which was originally dedicated in 2000. They actually rebuilt it and rededicated it just this past year. That's one reason we went. We got to go to the open house, and it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. The members are so excited to be a part of that. One interesting thing that did happen on my mission that sparked a lot of growth for some areas was we had some of the old video cassettes, the VHS cassettes that the church used, like the Lamb of God, translated into French and ran commercial advertisements for it on TV for people in the area to call and get a free video. And so the missionaries would deliver the video when somebody placed an order. And we had an incredible response to the commercials and advertisements that were run. And a lot of it was actually among a Haitian community in Montreal. And many Haitian families were converted to the gospel. And having these videos available and the advertising also helped a lot of people who had lost contact with the church get back in touch with missionaries and find where they, what ward they needed to be going to, and they had lost contact since they moved from their home country. So that was exciting to watch that play out. I served in the Canada Montreal Mission from January 2002 to January 2004, and let's see, my first area was Hull, 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 and that's out near Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And then from there I went to La Prairie, which is on the south shore, which is what they call across the river on the south side from Montreal City. And next I did serve in Montreal, downtown Montreal, for about 6 months. And from there I went to a town called Shawinigan. And then I went to a place called Jonquière, which is in the north part of the mission, about 6 hours from the mission home. And finally, my last area, and my 6th and last area, was Saint-Hyacinthe, and I spent the last 3 months of my mission there. So let me tell you about the culture of the Quebecois first. They kind of have a reputation. Some of them are quite proud of it, of being like the weather, kind of cold when it's cold and warm when it's warm. People are inside and keep to themselves a lot when it's cold in winter. That's where it's comfortable. It's really uncomfortable to be outside when it's so cold. During the summer, everyone's outside. They're all on their porch. People are, everyone's talking to neighbors and friendly. There's lots of parks. They're all walking in parks. People are outside during the summer. As far as how that affects their personality, a lot of people talk about how the Quebecois are cold on the outside, but they're really warm inside. Just like, it's cold outside and it's warm in their home. And what I like about that is they don't, they're not going to pretend to be nice to you or talk to you if they're not interested. They'll be direct with you. And when you do get to know and develop a friendship with them, they are very loyal and very kind and caring and hospitable people. And so I loved it. Like I felt people were, for the most part, they have a very genuine culture. And so I grew up in California, where a lot of people are very friendly, but maybe they don't want to talk to you. They'll be nice to you, but they may not want to talk to you, or they may be busy or something. And so for me, it was a contrast to meet someone who maybe seemed uninterested at first, but then actually was a really good friend. And so I liked that. I thought it was interesting. However, in Montreal, you have so many different cultures from all over the world. So let me talk about etiquette for a second. You got asked about etiquette. With the Quebecois, there was nothing different from growing up in my home and occasionally putting my elbows on the table, whatever. There wasn't anything offense. I never felt like I offended anybody by my etiquette at the dinner table. However, when I was in Montreal, you kind of have to be a chameleon if you're in this mission. just see what the people are doing. And a lot of times they're okay if you ask questions like what's appropriate. For example, if you're eating with the African family, you may be eating with your hand. Make sure you use your right hand, not your left hand. The left hand is used for dirty things. The right hand is used for clean things like food. If you're with a Chinese family, it's okay to pick up your bowl and drink your soup. We had one ward mission leader who was from London, and for him it was very important that missionaries used their cutlery appropriately, and for him that was important. So he helped us. He helped teach us the way we should eat according to the way he learned in growing up in London. I'm trying to think. You might have to use chopsticks. You might have to. There's so many different ways. You might eat the shell of the shrimp, or you might take off the shell of the shrimp. It depends, and just kind of watch what's going on around you. But it's exciting because you really do get exposed to so many different ways. So I think it's good for a missionary in those eating situations to be observant and kind and be willing to take correction. Sometimes the correction comes pretty abruptly, and don't take offense. In the city, you have people from all different cultures, and a lot of people are new to the area, and so most people in Montreal will actually listen to you or talk to you and have a conversation, because it's kind of like everybody's a stranger. Even people from Quebec, they've come to Montreal, to the city, to work or to go to school, and so a lot of people are open-minded, especially the younger generation, like the young single adult age. Very open-minded and willing to talk about religion. You might have, they may have strong opinions about it as well. But you can have great dialogue and conversation about religion. In some of the smaller towns, I found that it really wasn't effective to be pushy, especially because they're small towns and you're probably going to see that person again the next week. And so it's really, for us, it was helpful just to, we still, of course, we're missionaries. We ask people if they're interested. But to quickly accept no for an answer, and then a lot of times we'd offer service if it looked like they needed help with something. A great friendship we had where we ended up sharing the gospel with the family was they said, no way, go away, and they were painting their porch, and so we offered to, hey, we could come back tomorrow in our street clothes and help you paint. Would you like that? And they're like, oh, sure. And we developed a great friendship with them, and we'd see them about once a week just as friends and say hi. And finally, they asked about religion. And so I think it's a culture where it didn't really pay off to be pushy. It helped to be patient and just be create some awareness. Most people weren't aware of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I think since I was there, while I was there, and since I've been there, a lot has been done to develop awareness of the church, and people know who the missionaries are, and a lot of people distinguish now between missionaries from our church, from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and other missionaries from other faiths. One thing that we did that was exciting, I'll share this story quickly, is we went to a baseball game, the Montreal Expos, before they moved away from Montreal, and somehow it was arranged that we got to sing, the entire mission would sing the national anthem at the beginning of the game. And so we did. So we had, I think we had about 200 missionaries at the time singing the national anthem, around the pitcher's mound. And we were in the tunnel giving high fives to the San Francisco Giants as they went out to play. And that was just a really cool experience for us, first of all. But for weeks after, missionaries would see people in the park or out on the street and said, hey, you're one of those people that was at the game. And so these baseball fans recognized and remembered us, and just being out there and being, trying to be part of the community really helped a lot to create awareness and start the dialogue of religion with people. So Montreal is beautiful, first of all. There's some incredible architecture. It has a lot of very old historic buildings. If you've seen Ghostbusters, the building that the Marshmallow Man climbs up, that's there. You'll see that. Riding the bus around town. A lot of films are filmed there. It's a lot of Hollywood films are actually filmed in Montreal. And so sometimes you'll see, areas blocked off for filming or whatever, and that's kind of fun to to be in that environment. I mean, it has a very metropolitan feel. There's people from all over the world there on business, on travel, or just living there. There's several universities, so a lot of student areas. They have a couple different English universities, a French university. It's really cold. That's for certain. It gets, I think on some days it was like -40, which is where it doesn't matter if you're talking Fahrenheit or Celsius. They do use Celsius, there, by the way, in the metric measurements. So, when you're driving, it's kilometers per hour. You have to get used to that. 60 kilometers per hour sounds pretty fast, but it's not. So you got to watch your speed. And French and English are the main languages in Montreal, and mostly French outside of Montreal within Quebec. But maybe a third of the people you hear speaking are speaking something else. They'll be speaking Russian or an Eastern language, or Spanish is very common as well. So most people live in apartments in Montreal. There's a lot of apartments. There's also some beautiful homes in some areas as well. There's a beautiful park. Mount Royal Park, or Montreal Park, was designed by the same guy who did Central Park in New York, and it just has beautiful paths and a pond that they turn into an ice skating rink during the winter, and they have sleigh rides, and it's just very kind of magical during the winter. The fall is gorgeous. The maple leaves all change, and speaking of maple leaves, their hockey teams are very well supported by fans, and it's very difficult to schedule an appointment during a hockey game or to try and track. But unless you want to watch the game with someone, they'll let you in. Crime really didn't seem to be. I never felt like fear being in Montreal. And, we'd be out till 9:30 or 10 at night sometimes with our appointments. There is an area called the Red Zone, which we never went to because it was the Red Zone, and it's mostly an old part of the city that has a lot of bars and things, and really people don't live there. It's just a kind of a commercial district, and so apparently there's maybe some crime going on down there that there was a good reason, I'm sure, that they told us to stay away, a few blocks of the city. But for the most part, it's very easy to get around and very safe. Most of the time we're in the subway. Oh, this is a really exciting part of Montreal. So they have the metro system, they call it. So you ride in these subway. They have 4 main lines to get all over the city, as well as some street buses if you need to get around. But they have underground malls, basically. Like, you can access a lot of the city, all of downtown, from underground, just walking through tunnels and taking the subway. And some people, they have their apartment has access to underground. They don't have to go out in the winter when it's -40 degrees. They can just go underground. They can get to their grocery store, to the mall, to work, to the bank, everywhere they need to go, just underground. That's pretty cool. So we really didn't tract, go door to door looking for people outside, because nobody's outside during the winter. So you meet people just in the tunnels down underground. You meet people on the subway. It's actually really cool. It's a really fun place. You get lost at first because you don't know where you're going, but just pick up a map and you can orient yourself pretty well, or ask people where to go. People are really friendly. So they do have a different currency. They have the Canadian dollar. I don't know what it is now. At the time, it was advantageous to us. We got more. I think we got $1.30 in Canadian money for $1 US. So things seemed to be a little cheaper. We went to Wendy's and you get a $1 burger, and it really is costing you like 75 cents or something. But I mean, as far as being able to access things, a lot of the shops and the restaurants, you wouldn't know if you were in the US or Canada, except for the French menus. But I mean, all the fast food chains and some of the restaurant chains and the stores, the grocery stores have different names, but you can get all the products you need. You can get your peanut butter and jelly. You can, whatever you need. If anything, they just have more variety because of such a diverse population, a culturally diverse population. Something outside of Montreal, I guess, that is easier to find. Maple syrup. They have even in Montreal they have them. It's called a sugar shack or cabane à sucre, and basically during the maple syrup season, so the early spring when the maple trees are letting their syrup out, you go to these places, and whatever you order on the menu, usually it's a breakfast type thing, but it'd be anything, and they bring out a pitcher of hot maple syrup, and you just pour it on your food, and maybe not the healthiest, but it tastes really good. So in the city of Montreal, there were, I think, 3 or 4 buildings, and I think now they may have double that. They have a couple new ones. And then in the suburbs of Montreal as well, there are several church buildings, and some of them are unique. Some, like the one I went to when I was in downtown Montreal, was like a 4-level building that had been converted to a church. And so when you're on the inside, it has kind of the same wallpaper and chair rail that a lot of the LDS churches have in Utah or somewhere in the U.S. But they also have. There was also an elevator. Classrooms were on different levels. The bishop's offices were on like the top level, and the chapel was in the basement, like a big open room down there. It's easy to get to a church building too. They're all near the metro stations, or in some of the smaller towns they have a very small meeting house where they just have a chapel and a few classrooms for a branch. But in Montreal, yeah, church. It feels like anywhere in the U.S. A lot of the Quebecois food, a really traditional thing is to have like a meat pie, or like a meat sandwich, like a turkey sandwich or corned beef sandwich. And a lot of times they'll put gravy on it and serve it with canned peas. That's like, they put gravy on everything. One like famous Quebecois food that they have throughout Canada now at fast food chains is poutine, and it's French fries with cheese curds. It's like pieces of cheese basically, and hot gravy on top to melt the cheese a bit. And it tastes amazing. It leaves your stomach feeling pretty heavy, depending on where you get it. Sometimes it's greasier than others, but it's really, really tasty, and something you'll find at all the little fast food chains or most restaurants is poutine. I talked a little bit about the cabane à sucre, which is the sugar shack where you put maple syrup all over your food. Some other things I had for the first time were I had like a rabbit stew. So a rabbit is not an uncommon meat in a lot of the Quebecois towns. I also tried a lot of international foods because we had investigators that were Chinese or from the Middle East or from India or Sri Lanka, and so we really got to taste a lot of different flavors that way. Not necessarily traditional Quebecois foods, but very common in the area. Some of my favorite like grab and go foods when we were racing between appointments were in the metro, the subway stations. You can get like just a really good slice of pizza. My favorite had like spinach on it, which I didn't even like spinach before my mission, but for some reason spinach on a pizza was really good. And or like a falafel, pita wrap, things like that. Just really tasty food everywhere. There was a lot of fine dining restaurants from what I hear. We never went to those because we didn't have a lot of money. So we had plenty to get by, but not to drop on the whole month's allotment on one meal. So one thing that was interesting, we didn't eat with members a whole lot. I know in some missions, missionaries eat with the member families maybe daily or even twice a day if they can, lunch and dinner. But in my mission, I would say on average 2 to 5 times a month we'd get to have dinner with the members, and it was actually nice. We really cherished those times with the members, and they were really valuable experiences to be in a member home and have that experience. That's one thing that I suppose a lot of missionaries could miss is being in there, in the LDS family home. A lot of times you're just either in your apartment or in a smoke-filled investigator's home. Smoking, I didn't bring that up earlier, but a lot of people smoke in Quebec. A lot of times you'll be sitting in an appointment, and especially if it's a first appointment and they just invited you in and they're in the middle of packing their cigarettes. They buy an empty cigarette tube and their own tobacco, and they're making their own cigarettes as you're having a discussion. So a lot of times the word of wisdom comes up pretty quickly. But we smelled like smoke every day when we got home. You kind of get used to it, but hopefully there's no long-term health damage to my lungs. Tim Hortons is like the donut chain there, and that's another thing I guess that would be unique to Quebec and Canada is Tim Hortons. Everybody goes to Tim Hortons. It's a combination of their Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks and Krispy Kreme all together. And we actually had a thing in the mission. So I loved the donuts when I was there. But we had this thing. So it like I said, it's really cold 5 or 6 months out of the year. There's snow and ice. And we have this thing, if you're a missionary and you slip on the ice and fall, we say donuts. Like, and what it means is if you've fallen, you have to buy donuts for all the missionaries that saw you fall. And I fell a couple of times and had to buy a few dozen donuts for some missionaries, and that was the thing we had a lot, were donuts. We bring them to our district meetings, with other missionaries, or zone meetings, and Tim Hortons is something you'll see on every corner. You can always rely on them to get you a nice fresh donut. I mentioned the falafel. Like, that was one of my favorite things, going to get a falafel wrap. The falafel, that's like the chickpeas, and I think they were usually fried, or I don't think they were baked, but they put like a really good Mediterranean yogurt sauce on them, and those are all, like, I ate those for lunch almost every day when I was in Montreal. That and pizza. Which I think poutine, you have poutine a lot too. It's like donuts, poutine, pizza. That's about a missionary's diet. Wow, so the languages, I love the languages. It's interesting, and I love the Quebecois accent in Montreal. So because there are so many people from different areas, or a lot of people, French is their second language, the accent, the Quebecois accent, isn't as strong in Montreal. You'll hear it, but you have people from France, you have people from French-speaking countries in Africa or from Haiti, so it's a bit of a different French in Montreal than it is in the rest of Quebec. Written and the words they use, everything is the same. But as you get further away from Montreal and some of the small towns, there's a lot more slang. And just like, I'm sure in any country, like if you think of the U.S., if you're going from Utah to New York to deep south, the accent it changes, but we all understand each other, and it's the same thing there. You understand everybody. People just have different accents, so that's it's interesting to do that. And sometimes when you first get to an area, especially with French being a second language, it's hard to understand some of the slang and some of the accent there. A lot of the it's interesting. A lot of the, I guess, the swear words, or the like the worst words you could say, are actually like religious terms. In fact, so the word tabernacle, their French word tabernacle, can either be a very sacred term, or it could be used as a very foul word, depending on the context and how you use it. And so that's something to be aware of and be cautious, especially if you're talking about the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. You want to, because it uses that word in it, it's something just to be aware of and get a sense of. There are two words. One is, some of the words they use in France are used differently in Quebec, and if you have a trainer like mine, when you get to the mission field, he'll let you know very quickly which ones they are, because sometimes it's inappropriate. I think it was the word for hug or for kiss in France is very inappropriate to use. And so people are patient with you, though. You're not the first person to be there learning their language, so people are patient as you learn. One thing to be aware of is some words in France, a stop sign says stop. They say stop, just like the English word stop. In Quebec, they use the word arrête. It's arret, and it's so it's interesting. In Quebec, sometimes they've used an older form of a word, or a more true to French, historic French word in their translations. And other times, you'll hear them use English words. With car parts, especially, vehicles. I don't know if it was 40, 50 years ago when vehicles became very common for everybody to own. The manuals were all in English for the vehicles they had in Canada. They didn't have bilingual manuals back then for the cars, and so it's le tire for a car tire. It's le bumper, whatever. Different. They use the English word for cars, and so things like that are very distinct from French. But when you in a religious context, in the teaching the gospel context, it's the same language. It's there's not really much of a difference. It's just kind of the day-to-day life that has different, where you'll find different meanings or different language used. So I guess like in the MTC, we learned bonjour, comment allez-vous, like a very formal French greeting. And what became more common when I was a missionary was salut, is like, I think the literal translation is health, but it's just like what you say, you say hi or ça va. Just a very short greeting like that. So people aren't really very formal in greeting strangers like apparently they are in other parts of the world. So I think one is with the language. I'd been in the mission for about 3 or 4 weeks and went to my first French-speaking appointment by myself without my trainer and with another missionary who had just been out a few weeks. Neither of us was confident in French, and we went to teach a family from Congo, and they were a refugee family. And we had, even though I hadn't understood a lot of the previous appointments and discussions with this family, I'd felt a lot of love with them, and they had a daughter who was 5 or 6, and she was kind of my friend because she would help me with my French and work on my speaking. But when we went to teach them, we had kept this appointment, and neither of us was confident in French. I was amazed at the spirit I felt as I felt guided in the words to say, and it was such a beautiful experience to feel the Lord's support, and I just remember so much confidence in the language after that experience. I had a long way to go to be fluent for sure, but I really felt the Spirit help me understand and speak. Another one was a series of spiritual experiences, and where I felt the time and effort I put into developing charity for the Quebecois people and being patient with rejection paid off was teaching a woman in her early 70s who chose to get baptized. And in her experience, she had been a member of another faith her whole life, and her experience was she had remembered seeing missionaries before, and the timing was right for her when she was in her 70s, that she felt when she saw missionaries, when she saw us again, that it was time to listen. And I visiting with her and hearing her spiritual experiences through the conversion process and finding the truth even later in life was such an amazing experience for me, and an important lesson for me to be patient and trust in God's timing and know that He's aware of His children. When it was below negative 40 degrees, and in Montreal, between the buildings, all the high rises, it gets really windy. And so with the wind chill and the temperature that cold, you can't stay outside more than probably 20, 30 minutes, at least not with the clothes I had on. It's not uncommon for especially a woman in her 50s or 60s, in like a sister in the church, to give the missionaries the kisses on the cheek, like kind of the French bisous, they call them, I think. And there's a word that if you change a vowel or two, it becomes a much more than a kiss. I'll just say that. And so a missionary was his first fast and testimony meeting, and got up to tell about how welcome he felt when the bishop's wife gave him the kisses on the cheek. And let's just say it caused a bit of laughter. It didn't come out the way he hoped it would. Honestly, it's hard to change companions. You get used to your companion, and then when you change and you have a different personality, it can either be really great or it can be challenging. And so I think that was the hard thing is feeling momentum build up and then a change, maybe disrupting that. It's hard when you're out in the cold and people don't want to talk to you. that gets hard. It was to continually pray for and develop charity. That's something I felt impressed to do starting at the MTC, and something that blessed my missionary experience and has been a blessing since, as I've been intentional in doing that. One uncomfortable thing is eating whole shrimp, so with like the eyes, the tail, the legs, and everything. That's really hard for me to swallow. Fortunately, I didn't have anything that felt too life-threatening. Really, the most dangerous thing, I think, was driving. Like when it's icy and you have missionaries from countries where it's never snowed before. driving can be scary, especially if you're not the one in control. um, that said, our mission president gave us time to go to the church parking lots and do donuts every snow day. So, you get your practice in. I heard about a missionary getting chased with someone with a broom, but that's not too bad. It's a safe place. Nothing too unique comes to mind, just layers. Most of the time I had on my, shirt and tie with a fleece jacket and then an overcoat, a hat, scarf. Make sure you got good gloves, maybe a couple layers of gloves, the gloves with mittens over the top. But yeah, just lots of layers. And the nice thing about the mission, you can buy whatever you need there. Like there's plenty of stores, and I couldn't get what I needed in California. So they have something called Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, and they have great sales that day. So that's when most missionaries, it's like kind of the beginning of the winter months, and that's when they go buy their big coats and stuff. Read the Book of Mormon. That's easy, yeah. Keep reading the Book of Mormon. Just find ways to serve and keep sharing the gospel, whether it's in person at school or online, or staying in touch with people that you met on your mission. I learned that if you're older and if you need to use a cane, that you can buy a spike and put it on the end of your cane to help you not slip on the ice. I'd never had to use a cane, fortunately, but I never knew those existed before. So the Canada Montreal Mission is definitely an exciting place to be a missionary. There's so many people from all over the world that many of them are looking for change in their life or for answers to questions. And it's a place where I really felt Heavenly Father was aware of His children and their needs. It was amazing to see people who have never prayed before in their life have their prayers answered. And really strengthened my faith in Heavenly Father's power and His care and concern for all areas of my life, not just how I'm doing with the gospel living or my church activity, but how He feels about me as an individual with my struggles and in my relationships and in my education. I learned a lot serving the people in the Canada Montreal Mission. It's an exciting place too to be exposed to so many cultures and languages. You'll get some of the best friends of your life, whether they're people you teach or your companions, your mission president. It's really a place where the church is growing. People are becoming more aware of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and people are longing to feel of God's love. They want that, and so to be able to share that is such an incredible opportunity.
Well, my first area was, I have to count, probably about 5 or 6 hours away from the mission home. So first we drove from Montreal, where the mission home is, to Quebec City, either way. And then from Quebec City, and then we spent the night there. And so that was my first tracting experience, was in Quebec City, where... And looking back, people in Quebec City are very nice for, relatively, they're really nice people. They're friendly and everything. And anyways, and so that was my first, and we actually, so that was my first tracting experience, and that was really great to be in the city. After that, the next day we drove all the way up to a place called Chicoutimi. There's a lot of Inuit words for cities up there. So like there's Chicoutimi, and I served in a place called Hochelaga, and one in Petawawa, and there's another place called Chibougamau, and there's just a lot of really great names for cities up there. So my first place was Chicoutimi, and so the French in Quebec is very different from the rest of the world. It's kind of like Cajun French in Louisiana, and it's a lot harder to understand. So my first area was way out in farmland, And so there's a lot of basically redneck. And they even had a sticker on their trucks that said Slednecks because it's always snowing. And so we called them the Slednecks. And so these people were, I mean, these are like farmers. They're very humble. They're very, well, they don't really like the missionaries, but and they have an accent that is just really hard to understand. And so my first teaching experience was a man who was from an area called Lac Saint-Jean, and the accent there is known to be quite strong, even for Quebecers. Like, they know that, like, if you say like, oh, like Lac Saint Jean, they're like, oh wow, the accent up there is really hard to understand, and you're like, yeah, it is. And so that was my first teaching experience, was with a man from Lac Saint Jean, and he had no teeth, so it was doubly hard to understand him because he couldn't like pronounce the consonants and things like that because he didn't have teeth. And so it was very hard to understand. I turned to my trainer and I said, what did he just say? And my trainer said, I don't know. This is why we bring this member with us, because he can actually understand what this guy's saying. So that was the first experience. And I was really happy because I got to say that wasn't the language that they taught me in the MTC. So I was kind of happy about that. So yeah, so that was where I really learned, what the cold was, because it was, way up north. It's one of the most northern areas in the mission. There's a couple of others that are more north than that, but it was very cold. Apparently I had just missed like the coldest part of it, which, that was okay with me. I'm fine with that. But anyway, so it was very cold, and yeah. So that was my first impression of the mission. Was it's cold. I can't understand the people, and I really. The way that I started thinking about it was, I wish that I got called to serve English, because if I was speaking English, I could actually say what I wanted to say to these people, and I got very frustrated that I couldn't speak to these people and I couldn't understand them, and it was very disheartening. I could speak a little bit better than some of the other missionaries at the beginning, because I had taken French in high school, and I had retained it a little bit. Just on a side note, my last name is Perdue, and that's a French word, and they say perdu, and Perdue means lost. So, and in French, the adjective comes after the noun, not before. So my name tag said Elder Perdue, which means lost elder. And to make it worse, it was actually like the feminine version of the adjective, so a lost girl elder, and that was my name tag. And so that I had lots of jokes about that over the course of the 2 years, and I came prepared for it. I knew it was going to happen, but by the end I was very, I was like worn out. So, yep. So that was fun. So Quebec is a French province in the country of Canada, and the mission includes all of the Quebec province, and it also includes a little piece of Ontario, which includes Ottawa, the nation's capital, and some other very small cities going up north. And then the top of it also goes into Nunavut and the Northwest Territories. So there's no missionaries up there, but it's a very geographically large mission, and so in Quebec they speak French, but it's not the same French as you would think. It's very, the accent is very peculiar, and in some cases it's really hard to understand unless I usually relate it to like Southern English, like from the Southern United States, because like in general, like it sounds sort of the same, but if you get really out there into very small towns, some of these people are very hard to understand. And so it's the same thing in Quebec. The culture is also very French. It's very reserved. They don't like change very much. They want to stay who they are. They want to keep to themselves and things like that. They're very adamant about keeping the French language, which is good. To keep the French language in the culture, because you don't want to lose what makes you a culture. And the food is French. Food is very French. Well, sometimes one of the main staple foods of Eastern Canada is called poutine, and in French you would pronounce it poutine. Well, in France you would say poutine, but in Quebec they say poutine, and it's French fries with cheese curd and gravy, and that's it, and it's delicious. Your first few times it's delicious, and then then it starts to get a little bit too much. But once a year, going along with the food theme, once a year they have this thing called cabane à sucre, or sugar shack, and up there that's where maple trees are. That's where maple trees grow, and so that's where they harvest the maple syrup, and it's fresh, real maple syrup. And the stuff that you buy in the United States, like Aunt Jemima, that's not maple syrup. That's corn syrup with maple extract in it. But real maple syrup is probably the most delicious thing on the planet. And so during the harvest, in the springtime, they have this feast with like ketchup bottles full of maple syrup, like fresh, real maple syrup. And they just have like all of these different kinds of foods, and you just pile it onto your plate and drown the whole thing in maple syrup and you eat it. And it's the greatest part of that culture. The best part about Quebec is cabane à sucre, and they'll probably agree with me. And they have great music during the cabane à sucre. It's very great. They do this thing called tire d'érable, which means maple taffy or maple toffee. And it's the same thing as maple syrup, except it's boiled at a higher temperature, so it becomes a little bit thicker, and they keep it hot, and then they bring out this manger, or like a trellis, or like basically an animal feeder full of snow. It's clean and it's full of snow, and they pour this hot maple toffee into the snow, and they give you a popsicle stick, and you stick it in there and you twirl it around, and you have this big glob of maple goodness on the end of the stick with snow in it, and you just eat it like that. And you'll get a headache for sure, but it's delicious. The French people are very nice. They're very nice, except towards religion, because, well, there is a thing called the Silent Revolution, and basically the Catholic Church had gone too far, and they had taken control of things that they shouldn't have, and so they had the Silent Revolution where they all stopped going to church, and everybody stopped going to church, and so it became the culture to dislike the church. In fact, all of their swear words are church words, and you'll find that when you go up there, you'll hear people start yelling out all these words from Scripture, and to you it's just nothing, it's just like, oh, that's, but to them it's a very bad word. So, and they use that to sort of fight against religion. And so they're not quite as nice to missionaries, but if you weren't a missionary, like, they would be the nicest people in the world. They're very nice. Canadians in general are just very nice. And the English people are as well. They're very nice. There's a lot of complaints, from both sides, and you're going to find that anywhere. Everybody complains about something, and there's always complainers. It seems like missionaries usually draw in the type of people who like to complain about stuff, because missionaries listen, right? And so these people are like, this guy's going to listen to me complain. So they do. And you do listen to them, and you try and help them. Yeah. So, anyways, so in Quebec, there's a, I mean, it's a huge immigration destination, and so we had a lot of Middle Easterners, we had a lot of Egyptians at the time because, Egypt was kind of in a scary moment, and so we had lots of refugees and lots of Africans and lots of yeah. There's quite a big English community in and around Montreal. Everywhere outside of that, it's French, but just close to Montreal, the island, it's very English because it's a great place to have a business, and so people will come from the United States and live there to do business there, and so they keep it English so that they don't have to learn French. Anyways, there's a big English community, and I had the opportunity to serve in 2 different English areas around Montreal, and it almost feels sort of oppressed. They sort of feel like they're oppressed from the French people because, me personally, I feel like it was just, I think I hit the microphone. Me personally, I feel like it's a misunderstanding, really, because, the French really, they want to keep their French, and so they see the English as a threat. And so it sort of just happens that way, that they feel that way towards each other, and it's gotten pretty heated before, like, including, like, armed military or policemen on the borders between the French and the English provinces, and so that's one aspect of the culture that you'll run into there. And there's a huge Hispanic community in there. There's a huge Jewish community in there. Montreal was actually founded by the Irish, funny enough, and so there's a lot of like, what's the word? Loyalty to the Queen. There's still a lot of loyalty to the Queen, which is interesting. I think it's cool. My grandparents are English, so I'm still sort of loyal to the Queen. But yeah, the church has been there for ever since, like, the beginning, because it's really close to New York. So they had, they would just go up, and it was called, what was it called? Northern Canada or something like that. I don't remember, but so they would send English speakers up there to make converts. Actually, interesting fact, provo is a French word, and it was originally spelled Provost, and but it's pronounced Provo. And so in Quebec, there's a bunch of Provos all over the place. Like, people, their last name is Provo. And so, I learned that when I was there. I learned that the settlers of Provo were French, and they're most likely from Canada. But the church has been there for a while. I remember reading on my missionary website that they had never called, like, specifically French missionaries until, I think it was like the 70s. And so they had, like, English missionaries that would learn French and would talk to the French people, but they never called, like, specifically French speaking missionaries until, like, the 70s. And so coming from that, like, they have now 4 stakes up there that are, like, totally French stakes, is it 4? I should probably check my facts before I say something wrong. They have that stake, and then they have that stake. Then they have the English stake, I think. Okay, yeah, so they only have 2 stakes. Yeah. So they have 2 stakes now. And so, like, in the span of however many years that was, it seemed, when I read it, it seemed like it had been only 30 years and they already have 2 stakes, which was really cool. But Anyways, that's the church history there. In general, there's pretty much not a lot of danger, especially for missionaries. It's very westernized. People know who you are. There's nobody that'll run outside with a shotgun or anything like that, saying like "get off my lawn." Like that doesn't happen. But as far as crime goes, I mean, there's a lot of drugs on the streets of the big cities, and even a lot of the little cities have lots and lots of drugs. It's just it's because it's cold and there's not very much sun throughout the year. It's a very hard place to live because people get depressed really easily from that, and so there's a lot of healthcare and people just not being able to handle it and stuff like that. So that's something that you'll run into. Interesting fact, I don't know if this has to do with anything. One time we were serving in one of the more wealthy parts of Montreal, and we decided that we would find the most expensive street and that we would knock on all those doors. It was we were just very tired of getting rejected, and so we just thought we might change it up a little bit and see what rich people had to say to us. And so we started knocking on these doors, and we came across these two young guys, both Italian, and they were driving. One of them was driving his brand new Challenger. The other one had one of the new Mustangs. And they were just admiring their cars, and so we walked up to them and we started talking to them about their cars, and they, eventually they would obviously ask questions. They were young guys; they were like our age, and so they started asking us questions like, "What are you guys doing here? Like, what's your job?" and stuff like that. And we're like, "Oh, we work with the church." And and I mean, they were thinking they sort of relate everything to Catholicism because that's. Up in Quebec, that's pretty much the only church that there ever was. So everything everybody knows about church is mostly from the Catholic Church. These guys are asking us like, "Oh, so you work for the Pope and stuff?" And we're like, "Well, we're not Catholic, but we go around and we try and spread the word about Jesus Christ and stuff like that." And so, "Oh, that's super cool." And so we started asking them, and they're like, and we started asking them like, of the people on the street, who are they? How do they have so much money? He's like, well, for the most part, that guy's a crook, that guy's a crook, that guy's a crook. That's a huge, Middle Eastern family that just all lives together in the same house so they can have a big house. That guy is, a crook. It was just, we just sat there and was like, wow, we did not realize that these people were crooks. So my favorite part about being in Quebec was the multicultural part of it. Mainly because I got to taste food from around the world. I had Sri Lankan food, I had, Northern Indian food, I had Southern Indian food. One of them was more spicy than the other, I don't remember which one. Anyways, delicious. And I got, Chinese food from Chinatown, amazing. Mexican food and what's El Salvadorian food, and all of these different countries. I got fufu from Africa. I got I know there's other ones. You get the classic potatoes and beef. I ate moose. I thought it was beef. So they served us this meat, and I look at it and I just assumed that it was a steak. I thought it was beef, and so I start to eat it, and it tastes kind of funny. And I didn't say anything. I'm not going to say anything. This is my first area. I'm not going to say anything. so I just ate it. It was beef tasted kind of weird, but that was okay. It wasn't until a few weeks later that my companion notified me of what I ate, and he said that was orignal, which is moose. And so I was very, surprised. I said, "Oh, that makes a lot more sense now. Why it did not taste like beef." What else did I get to eat? Thai food. We did we volunteered at a Thai restaurant, and we would help prepare the food a little bit. And she always gave us some free Thai food, so that was delicious. Any other kinds of food? There's always French food. You get cheese and breads are very cheap up there, which is really nice. Cheaper. I mean, it's not as cheap as in France, so I've heard, but it's cheaper than here for like really like designer cheeses and like good delicious cheeses. Yeah. So the food was great. I don't think I'd ever tasted like fresh real baklava before, but that's delicious. And there's also another place in Ottawa. Ottawa's great, by the way, for food, because there's these things called food trucks. And I've seen a couple of them around here in Provo, but in Ottawa, they're all over the place. There's all these food trucks. And so we had one member, he was recently married and less recently returned from his mission. He was probably like 24 or something like that. And he would always take us to these food trucks. He's like, these food trucks are great. And so we got to taste like rice crepes from Lebanon or something like that. So, and then this other guy, anyways, he took us to this restaurant that was a Greek. Was it called the Mad Greek? No, that wasn't it. It was a Greek bakery. And they had, all kinds of delicious Greek foods. And we asked them, we said, "So have you seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." We're like, "So how true is it to a family-owned Greek restaurant?" They're like, "It is spot on. That is exactly what a Greek family-owned restaurant is like." And so that was really funny. Yeah. Oh, there was in one of my areas, there was a Greek family, and they fed us a Greek salad with real Greek olives, like from Greece, with the seed inside. And it was the most delicious salad that I've ever eaten in my life. It was so good. It was Gouda cheese and like all of this other like cucumber chunks and tomato chunks. It was so delicious. So yummy. So the accents are very different. And in France, for example, you would say, if you wanted to say, "What are you doing here?" you would say, "Qu'est-ce que tu fais ici?" Very, very proper, like, "Qu'est-ce que tu fais ici?" Or even like, "Qu'est-ce que tu fais ici?" That's more like Swiss. But anyways, I'm not very good at the accent. But in Quebec, it sounds more like, "Ça que tu fais ici?" Very different. And it's you can find where that would, sort of come in. Like sec is in qu'est-ce que tu fais? Sec tu fais. And then ici, like in France they say ici, and then in Quebec when they're really angry they put a T at the end for no reason. It just sounds meaner, I guess. So it's ici. And so yeah. Some other things, I know a lot of angry things because people were angry at us a lot. And so another one is when you say like get out, is to say, like in France they would say what would they say? I don't know what they would say. But the word for outside is dehors. It's like DEHORS, but it sounds like dehors. And so, but when they're really angry, they will say dehors, and they'll put a W in it for some reason. And this lady was very mad at us, and I don't know how I didn't laugh when she said that, but afterwards we laughed a little bit. Dehors. She was like, "Wow." I remember one of my companions, he was learning, I think I was his trainer. Or no, I got him right after he was trained. And he was talking about how some guy was telling them how to speak Quebecois French, and he said, well, it's a good way to start a sentence is with ben, and a good way to end a sentence is with le. So, which is, I mean, not like every single sentence, but like you'll find that that's very common. They'll be like, ben, je sais pas là, ben, ça que tu fais ici là, and like, that was the one I used earlier. Did you catch it? Ben, ça que tu fais ici là. That's just, that is the syntax of a Quebecois sentence. So, yeah. What else? It talked about how normal. I mean, like swear words in France are normal French swear words. You know, they're not. They don't mean anything. They were probably made up words or something like that. In Quebec, all of their swear words are religious words, and so like when somebody screams baptism, they don't want to get baptized. They're actually cursing, and so. Yeah, so watch out for that. Be careful when you say religious words around people. Make sure that it's in context and very clear that you. The worst part is that like the very worst word that you could say, and I'll use the English word so that I don't swear, is tabernacle. If you say that in Quebec, it's equivalent to using the F word. So it's very difficult to talk about the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Quebec. So yeah. So that's funny. In Quebec, they call their accent, well, there's two different ways to say it. Like I think outsiders will call it Quebecois. But if you're real, or I think the person is a Quebecois, and then the accent is called joual. So people from Lac Saint-Jean, they have a very strong joual. And so they'll say like a normal person would say, je suis allé fetcher la vache, which means I went out to fetch the cow. And somebody from Lac Saint-Jean would say it more like, je suis allé faire la vache. And it's very, and imagine that with no teeth. It's even worse. And so they'll use the word flat tire, and that's a French word in Quebec. And they'll say j'ai un flat tire. That's the accent that they use. They even use an English R when they say it, but they think that it's French sometimes. Like I've heard a story of somebody coming up to a missionary and saying, comment dit flat tire en anglais, which means how do you say flat tire in English? And the missionary responds, that's an English word, it's flat tire. And he says, he's like, no, that's not English. And he's just very confused. He thought that was a French word his whole life. And so like we'll say, and sometimes it's that way, but sometimes it's the other way around, because they'll say like they'll use very old French sometimes. So in France, a car is a voiture, une voiture. That's a car. But in Quebec, sometimes they'll refer to a car as a cart. They'll say like le char, and so that's there's that. And so and in France, even the stop signs say stop. They've invented a word, stopper. That's in France, stopper. And they also invented the word parking. But in Quebec, you don't park the car. C'est pas le parking. It's not parking. It's stationner. You stationize. I don't know how to say it, but you can't say parking, and you can't say and you don't use voiture as a car. You say char. Mostly in car terms, they'll use a lot of English words like il faut checker l'huile. You have to check the oil. Checker, that's a verb in French, I guess. and other stuff like that. Yep. Personally, I was very confident, and I thought that I was ready for everything, and when I got there, I found out that I wasn't. And so it's very good to be humble when you're preparing for a mission, and to really think about the fact that it's really hard, even if you don't think that it's going to be hard. And so, like at the beginning of my mission, I felt like I knew what was going on. I felt like I knew what to do. But I quickly learned that, there's you can never know enough, and so eventually I figured out that preaching my gospel really was, the best way to go, and as soon as I figured that out, like everything started looking up, and everything, my mission got a lot happier. So that's something definitely to think about. So in my very first area, because people don't like religion very much, this was a small town, and the missionaries had knocked on every single door multiple times. It's been ages, and so we weren't having a lot of success because most people already knew who we were, and really weren't interested in listening to more of what we had to say. And we were having a really rough time with it, and we were kind of tired of it. And we went to our ward mission leader, and we asked him, do you have any ideas that how we can, help people understand who we are and stuff like that, or something like that. How can we find people that are interested? And he told us the story of his missionaries. He said that they had gone into the forest, and they had knelt down and prayed, and they were trying to find somebody who was ready. And so they did that, and then they went and started knocking on doors, and he was the third door that they knocked on. And this is the second time that he had ever met missionaries, and the first time he was going through a Buddhism phase, and he just didn't want to talk to the missionaries. But the second time, he was in between, different religions and everything, and so when the missionaries came, it was perfect timing, and I can't remember how fast he decided he wanted to join the church, but he's been there ever since, and he's one of the strongest members in that branch now. So he told us that story, and so we're thinking to ourselves, well, maybe that's what we should do. And I kid you not, it was an early spring morning. There was snow on the ground, and we had gone into one of the national parks, which are everywhere. Basically everything that doesn't have a house on it is a national park, and beautiful. Anyways, and so we had gone into this forest, and we knelt down, and I said a prayer. And we each said our own prayers, and then we prayed together. I said a prayer, and he said a prayer, and we prayed to find somebody who was ready. And then probably maybe a week, 2 weeks later, it wasn't our third door, but maybe a week or 2 weeks later, I crashed the car. And so we lost the car, and I was furious about it. I did not, because I lost my driving privileges in the process, and I was very mad about that. I could not bear the thought of going 2 years without driving a car. And and I hope that President Cannon is watching this right now, because he's probably laughing his head off. So we lost the car, and we had decided that the thing to do would be to grab the bikes, or find bikes, ask the members for bike to the church in the morning, study at the church, and then start knocking on doors around the church so that if we found somebody, it wouldn't be hard for them to go to church. And, I did not realize this at the time. Like, I was still upset about losing the car. But the fact that that happened led us to this situation where we could knock on this lady's door. And she had been kicked out of her apartment by her landlord and locked out, and she could not get in there anymore. And she could not take her stuff. And so she had gotten a new apartment, and she was in the process of painting it because it smelled like cigarettes. And, as soon as she started talking to us, we started asking her about what was going on. She completely opened up to us, and she was crying and everything. And so we thought to ourselves, we need to get the Relief Society president to come and talk to this woman. And we did. And so the Relief Society president, they hit it off right away. And she was so good to that woman. And she was such an amazing Relief Society president. And then I got transferred pretty much right after that happened. And so I didn't hear about this until later, but that woman ended up getting baptized about 3 months later. And it was the first one that they've had in quite a long time. I was in an area called Trois Rivières, and it means 3 rivers. It's sort of a delta thing. It's like 1, 2, 3 rivers. So we, not very much success, and it was a very poor city, and there's a pulp factory which made it smell like horrible. There's a paper mill, and paper mills smell terrible. And so anyways, we weren't having very much success. One time on the way back from a zone conference in Quebec City, we were in the car, and we receive a text message that says, "This is a media referral, here's the address, etc." Name is Joseph Jordan. And so we are en route, back to our house, and we're like, you know what? And we had just come from the training, so we're all pumped up and ready to go do some missionary work. We're like, we need to contact this guy immediately, as soon as possible. So we go to the house, and we get out of the car, and we knock on the door, and he opens the door, and he says, "Bonjour," and we say, "Bonjour," and he's like, "English?" And we're like, "Yeah, we speak English." And he's like, "Oh, okay, good." And so I hope that he's watching this too, because he would love this. He and his wife were just gems, absolute gems. They're some of the nicest people we've ever met, and they fed us very regularly after we had met them. He had a friend who was a member of the church, and he gave him, and this friend didn't go to church anymore, but he had given him a picture of the second coming of Jesus Christ, the famous, I don't remember who painted it, but that famous picture. So he had that hanging up in his bedroom before we even got there. And we asked him, we're like, "How did you know, why the Mormons?" And he said, "Well, I really like Egyptian stuff. And I was reading some article on something Egyptian, and I saw an ad for Mormon.org, and I said, oh, why not?" And so he clicked on it, and they said, "Do you want missionaries to come over?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And so when we showed up, it was funny. He was like, "Man, that was fast." It was like a day. Not even a day had gone by, and we were there. And so we just remember thinking to ourselves, yes, we did it right. And immediately after that, we reported that we had contacted the referral. That's very important. You have to report that you contacted them. And so we did that. We just felt really good about ourselves because we did everything right. And the Jordan family, they were probably the one of the coolest people that or at least one of the coolest experiences that we had in that area. And so yeah, Diane and Joseph, they were super cool, and I still talk to them on Facebook sometimes. They're great, and they take care of the missionaries still, and they let the missionaries do service over at their house all the time, and they're just super solid. They're cool. I should mention that they got baptized while I was there. So that was also another reason why it was super cool, because I was there when we had found them, and I was there when they had got baptized, and that was a dream of mine ever since the beginning of my mission, was to find somebody and also be able to see them get baptized. And so that's selfish, and I know it's not about me, it's about their decision to join the church, and which is an amazing decision that they had chosen, and I'm just glad that I could be a part of it in such a huge way. And so yeah. So my experience was a lot different than most missionaries' experiences. I had about 15 companions on my mission. 15, yeah. Well, including the MTC, which is very different from normal. Normally you have maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 even, but never 15. But it was really cool because I got to meet so many different people, and I got to know so many different kinds of people, and how I react to them, and I got to adapt, and that was really cool. I also had 7 areas of the mission, so I had moved a lot too, which was also cool because I got to meet a ton of different people. But it was devastating every time I had to leave because I grow to love the people so much, and then you have to leave. My first area was way up north. It was very cold. My second area was summertime downtown Montreal. That was probably the coolest. It's just in the big city. It's summertime. There's stuff going on. There's about 1 billion festivals during the summer in Montreal, and really high-end universities there too. And so we got to meet a lot of really cool people there. Third area. Where was my third area? Third area was Petawawa. That was like a military base. My companion described it like this. He said there's 3 basic kinds of people here. There are scientists, because there's a nuclear power plant, so there's like nuclear scientists there. There's military guys there because there's an army base, and there's crazy people there. And it held true. I mean, those are the 3 kinds of people that we met there. And it was a small town, but it was just like the branch was just, everybody in the branch was just super cool. They were some of the greatest people. That wasn't my third area. My third area was Greenfield Park. That's just south of Montreal. Montreal is an island, so this is on the south shore of the island. And I was there during the fall, and that was Canada in the fall blows your mind. You anything that if you think that you have seen beauty in the fall, you haven't, unless you've been to Canada. So I was there in the fall, and that was just a wonderful time in my life, and I got to meet Tudu and Ditso were like the coolest. It was a mother and her daughter from Africa, I think from Cameroon. And they were the coolest people that I've ever met. Among the coolest people. I don't want to I don't do favorites. Okay, so that was my third area, and that was beautiful. So then I went to Petawawa. That was winter time. That was very cold. I learned what freezing rain was there. That was fun. Then I went to Trois-Rivières. And in Trois-Rivières, that was probably the hardest and best time of my mission, because we had I had way more success there than I had anywhere else, and I felt really good at the end of it. And then I got moved to Kirkland, and I always feel like I'm going to be missing something. Kirkland is the West Island of Montreal. That's where all the English people live, and it's very wide open. You'd think that it would all be city, but it's not. It's just there's plains and everything, and mostly suburbs. And so that was really cool, except for using the buses, because they only came every half an hour, and we didn't have a car for the first transfer, and that was really difficult. But I was there for the longest, and I got to know the members really well, and some of my favorite members come from Kirkland. So then after Kirkland, moved to Ottawa. I think that was it. Ottawa City. And I was there I was there for the fall. Yeah, I was in Ottawa for the fall. And that was amazing. I was in the nation's capital during the fall, I guess. I mean, it was beautiful. I got to see like the tail end of summer and the start of winter. I never got to see the giant ice skating rink though, which was sad. But Ottawa is a great place. Lots of different cultures and stuff like that. And that was definitely one of my favorite areas. I had some really good companions there. So that was fun. So advice that I would have for somebody who just got called to Quebec is prepare yourself for a cold winter. I suggest like undergarment leggings, like not like underwear leggings, but like I'm gonna start over.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So advice that I would have for somebody who just got called to Quebec is to be very prepared for the winter. I got LL Bean thermals, which are great, and they're very warm and definitely worth the price. Other advice as far as like spiritual matters go is you need to really prepare, and you really need to get to know Preach My Gospel and start early to rely on the Lord, and to get away from your own ideas of what you think is going to work. The best option is always what Preach My Gospel says. And even if you think that it's lame, and you think that it's been done before, and you think that it's not going to do anything for this person, or it's not the right thing for this person, you're never going to know unless you try it. And that's something that it is important to know, is that, as it says in Alma chapter 32, you have to experiment on the Word. You have to experiment first on what it says to do. And if that doesn't work, then you talk to your mission president. But, I mean, you should always choose Preach My Gospel over your own ideas of what to do. I can't stress how important that is. Another thing is to not let anything go to your head. There is no favored areas. There are no favored positions. A lot of people that have served in leadership really didn't want it, and wanted to be a real missionary, especially by the end, where every single day all you're worrying about is the people that you're teaching. And you'll find that as you go along, if you have other stuff to worry about, whether it's back home or anything like that, it's a lot harder, and it makes the mission a lot harder. So you have to focus on what's important, and you'll want to focus on what's important, because you'll realize that that's what really makes you happier. And I just want to share my testimony about my mission. I feel like Montreal and that whole area, I feel towards that the same way that I feel towards the temple. If I ever go and visit there again someday, I'm going to feel like I'm stepping on holy ground, because that's where I learned who I was, and that's where I learned who I wanted to be. And that's where I got a head start on where I wanted to go in my life, and be nice to other missionaries. A lot of people have a really hard time on a mission, and if all you're doing is telling them that they're doing a bad job, then that's all they're going to think of themselves. And don't worry about them, on the other hand, too much, because then they feel like there's something that needs to be worried about, and that's also not good. But just be friends with them and be nice to them, and this is my testimony, is that the church is true, and I would never trade that experience for anything in my life. And I'm so excited for you to get called there. I think probably the best advice that I will ever give is learn how to have fun, but not at the expense of the church or your own self-respect. So make it fun, but be careful when you do. Don't go overboard. That's what I'm trying to say.